Well, that's it. The 2026 NFL Draft is in the books. The Detroit Lions have made 7 picks this year, and we're going to talk about each and every one of them. We're going to go through each one, how they fit into what the Lions are trying to do this offseason after last year's disappointing 9-8 season. First things first, before we get into the draft, I want to make something perfectly clear. We're just going to talk about each player and what they may potentially bring to the table, because that's what the draft is. It's all potential. This is a crapshoot. There are no grades to me until we're 2-3 years down the line and we can see what they do on the NFL field, because where you go matters. What coaching staff get to develop you matters. What fit you make with the other players matters. I think that there is something to be said about it. I don't think every Hall of Famer is a Hall of Famer if they go to the Cleveland Browns, or honestly where the Detroit Lions have been in some years. So it's like, it's been, environment matters. So I don't like to grade so much as I like to analyze how they're a fit and what we like to do. And what do the Lions like to do? They like to run the football. They like to, be creative with the passing game. And ideally, we like to keep the pocket collapsed and, let our coverage guys, make plays. And it's worked in the past, obviously, with the 15-2 season. And we forced a lot of turnovers last year, struggled making turnovers. And, of course, the injury bug hit them real bad, as always, and especially on the defensive side of the ball. But as I've said, since the season ended, even though it was massively disappointing to me personally as a Lions fan, I really felt like last year's team was a Super Bowl contender deep down. I really, really feel – and I still feel this year that they can do that again. You really just change two results of games, and really we had a lot of games come down to the final possession, and really we execute a little better on 2 final possessions. We're talking about an 11-6 team that wins the NFC North, wins the tiebreaker with Chicago, and they host a playoff game in a weird year for the NFC, where I feel like if you put the Lions in the playoffs, who knows? I'm not saying I'm not downing the Seahawks or the Rams, very legitimate teams. I'm just saying that I liked how the Lions matched up with them, and the Lions did play the Rams earlier in the year in LA and played them to a 1-possession battle to the final gun. Mm-hmm. So the capability was there, and I feel like there was a missed opportunity for the Lions to miss the playoffs in last year's NFC. This year, however, the draft has been finished. And we're, going into this draft, we know that they needed an offensive tackle. Taylor Decker had asked for his release. He still has not been picked up by anybody. So that leaves a offensive tackle hole on a offensive line that was, quite frankly, the problem for the Lions last year. I guarantee you, if Kevin Zeitler and Frank Ragnow are still playing for this team, the Lions do not finish 9-8. They win those 2 games I tell you about that make them 11-6, and they go to the playoffs, and who knows? And they're a much better team with those 2 players, because the interior of the offensive line was very, very weak for Detroit last year. And now you take an offensive tackle out that had already been dealing with a lot of injuries and already been dealing with the decline in play. So in a lot of ways, I feel like if you get the right offensive tackle in this draft that's pro ready, you're looking at an upgraded offensive tackle, because Taylor Decker was starting to measure out as an average offensive left tackle, which is not a bad thing, but you can do better. So now here's how it happens. We'll get into the picks and we'll explain what happens, actually. As a matter of fact, let me just stretch this out a little bit. But the Lions made 7 picks in this NFL draft. They didn't make a lot of big investments in free agency, so we knew that there was going to be some big hole plugging in this to some degree, or at the very least, they were going to have to go after needs, which is not something Brad Holmes likes to do. We like to go best player available. But let's get into it. Round 1. First up, first round, pick 17, Blake Miller, offensive tackle out of Clemson. I think the Lions had to come out of this first or second round with an offensive tackle. And with what the board was looking, they had 2 choices. They could have went Monroe Freeling, who projects as more of a left tackle kind of guy, and they had Blake Miller, who, even though a lot of people had him projected early second round, if you needed a right tackle, Blake Miller was your guy, because he had played just about every single snap at Clemson at right tackle. I think maybe a few at left, but he is a right tackle through and through. He is used to that. He fits the scheme. So they had 2 choices, Monroe Freeling or Blake Miller. So obviously this declares that Penei Sewell is going to be moving to left tackle. Blake Miller is going to be a right tackle for the foreseeable future if things work out the way they want it to. Monroe Freeling went a couple picks later to the Panthers, who were looking more for a left tackle, because that's what he was. So this is the pick, and he's a stud. He's a guy who has a great RAS, a relative athletic score, 2 sacks allowed and 808 pass blocking snaps. And as I said before, 3,778 snaps played for the Tigers at Clemson. He's an Iron Man. He's a guy who played through everything. It's not that he doesn't get hurt. He just plays through it. He got surgery and missed one practice and was back at it. Lions offensive line, why was this such a big deal? Because as I mentioned before, all the losses, the Frank Ragnows, the Zeitlers, and now it's a Taylor Decker problem. So they finished near the bottom of the league in how we win in pass blocks. And, this guy steps in day one and is going to improve that because he is a very solid pass blocker, especially at the right tackle position, which is typically known for more of a run blocking style. So let's talk about him as a player. What does he bring to the table? Well, he plays with really, really, really good balance. He's a four-star recruit out of high school. He's always been really athletic. He mirrors extremely fluidly. His pass protection technique, he's very patient with his moves. He's very good with his hands. Run blocker, he is a complete mauler. He's going to drive guys off the lines. He is a heavy-handed kind of guy. He's going to get his hands on you. He's going to drive you. He's going to finish his blocks. And as I said before about being a Dan Campbell guy, when it comes to motor, when it comes to toughness, this is your guy. He hasn't missed a start in 54 games. He broke Clemson's consecutive starts record, and he's played through everything. He's played through everything. And the value where he's at, as I said, there's a couple mock drafts that we're going to have him closer to, the second round. But again, in terms of looking for a right tackle, this was your guy. You needed one in the first round. This was, again, somebody you're gonna want to play. So Blake Miller is your right tackle of the future. Is he going to play this year? I think potentially. I think there's a good chance. I think Larry Borum is your other option there, and he is not a long-term, and you just invested a first-round pick in this guy. I think it's going to end up being Blake Miller as your right tackle, Penei Sewell as your left. And we move into the round 2. Lions moved up in round 2 to pick 44 to take Derek Moore, our friend out of Ann Arbor in Michigan. He is a defensive end. He's an edge rusher, something that a lot of Lions fans have been clamoring for some time. Ever since we drafted Aiden Hutchinson, I believe this is the highest edge rusher we have taken. I think that's a pretty safe bet at this point. But good pick. I think that this is if you wanted a guy on the other side of Aiden Hutchinson who's going to draw attention, I think Derek Moore is the kind of guy who's going to develop into that. Baltimore guy, he went to St. Francis Academy before he went to Michigan. Last year is where he really broke out. 10 sacks, 10 and a half tackles for loss. He was Michigan's Defensive Player of the Year. I know I'm a big fan of Derek Moore. I've always thought he was a very good player. He's got a very good first step. He's very quick. Detroit, we had Muhammad, who broke out for 10 sacks last year. We opted not to sign him to a deal. Tampa Bay ended up doing that, so there was a big hole there at edge rusher. And again, not a big thing that they addressed in free agency. They went into this draft again, kind of declaring their need for a defensive end. They go with the man from Michigan. And what does Derek Moore bring to the table in terms of that? Well, again, he's always been kind of a stud, 4-star guy out of high school. He's a pass rusher. He's very explosive off the edge, violent first step. He's got really elite hand usage, and he had a really good game against Nebraska, a game I went to in Lincoln. He had 1.5 sacks and was just disruptive the entire game. He was always in the backfield. In fact, let's pop some film on. We'll take a look at it. Here's some of Derek Moore at Michigan. As you see there, collapse in the pocket. Again, that's a guy who not only is he going to bring a pass rush, he sets a firm edge on the run defense. He's got good leverage. He's got good strength. He looks small on film. He's actually 6'3", about 260 pounds. And his motor, like a lot of Michigan defenders, the motor is going to be his greatest strength. And it's something you'll see here on the tape here as he kind of beats the stunt, gets the pressure, gets a nice hit on the quarterback. Again, just kind of never gives up on the play. That's a legal hit. He's that's one thing we got to kind of notice in the NFL these days and in college. Big time game against Oklahoma. There's a big tackle for loss against a really nice player there. John Mateer, John Mateer had a great game against this, but once the defense really slowed down Oklahoma in the second half, and Moore was a really, really big part of that, as you see there, getting another pressure on John Mateer. And I think with Derek Moore, again, you needed an edge to groom next to Aiden Hutchinson, and I can't think of a better place to go to try to dip back in and get some sacks on the other side of a big boy from Ann Arbor, then get another big boy from Ann Arbor. And again, you're seeing on that clip getting a free rush and getting a hand on the football on what was going to be a big play there for Oklahoma. So again, traded up to get this. So they knew they needed an edge, and as we know with Brad Holmes, he is going to go get his guy when he identifies a need. I think it's a big steal at 44. I think he was climbing big from a big Senior Bowl, as we see a clip there from that Nebraska game I talked about, just absolutely dominating the tackle. He didn't even get a sack on that play, but he very well could have. But Derek Moore, I think, fits in very nicely on the other side of the edge. Gets in. Well, you can start him as a third down pass rusher, but I think he has the tools to be a 3-down guy that can play across from Aiden Hutchinson from here to the future. Coming into this draft, the Lions did need an off-ball linebacker, being that Alex Anzalone is on his way to Tampa Bay through free agency. I knew that was kind of happening. There seemed to be some tension there in the preseason based on his contract, I think going back to even the previous season. And they really felt like they just didn't want to invest any money in Alex Anzalone. So you kind of knew they were going to be looking for someone to fill that will linebacker spot. And they looked back to Ann Arbor after going and getting Derek Moore from Michigan. They go and get Jimmy Rolder, 3rd round, pick 118. Fourth round, pick 118. He was slowed by injuries early in his Michigan career. Didn't play a ton, but in 2025, that's when he really kind of showed what he could do. He was second team All Big Ten, 73 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and an interception. Lions needed some depth. They have Malcolm Rodriguez. They got Derek Barnes. And, of course, they've got the stud Jack Campbell, all-pro guy. But depth is important. And, of course, replacing that Alex Anzalone role, somebody that can be able to cover some guys out of the backfield. He's going to be a guy that contributes on special teams as well. He's a Chicago kid from Marist High School. He was a multi-sport guy. I remember that when we recruited him. He was a multi-sport guy, played baseball as well. And he brings a lot to the table. And, we're going to take a look here for a quick second. Rolder, again, kind of one of those guys that brings a good motor. That's kind of, if you play Michigan, you play a defense, you're going to be a guy that's going to fly around, be one of those guys getting to the football. He's a tackler. He's a standout tackler, good tackling technique, wraps up, finishes consistently. As you see there, he wraps up, gets both legs, takes them down. He's an instinctive. He processes quickly. He sees the play and he gets to the ball. He knows where it's going before the ball is getting there. I think in terms of an athlete, I think he's a solid athlete, if not a strong athlete. But like I said, what sets him apart, was always stepped him apart, Rolder, from everybody else on the defense, has been his smarts and his ability to read. As you see there, he reads the short game pass against a pretty darn good Washington offense and makes the tackle, wraps up. He's a guy that really does remind you, when you watch the film, of Alex Anzalone, as you see his 1 interception on the season there against Washington. Again, in terms of value, round 4, if you're looking for solid linebacker depth that can cover out of the backfield, wrap up, make tackles, I think he's the kind of guy. And also, I will say that the one thing is that he's limited in some of his college experience. Really only started the 1 year last year. Other than that, he was been corner of a special teams kind of guy. But that's the kind of guy the Lions like. Guy who loves playing special teams, likes to get his head dirty and get in there. And I think this is a really good pick for the Lions, who, again, going into this draft, needed some linebacker depth, potentially an Anzalone replacement. They may have found him with Jimmy Rolder. Lions' 4th pick in this draft was Keith Abney II, 5th round, pick 157 out of Arizona State. He's a defensive back. And this is perhaps, I think this is going to be a popular opinion, perhaps my favorite pick of this draft. I knew the Lions coming into this draft were going to need defensive back help, whether it be at safety, whether a cornerback, because Terrion Arnold, it's debatable whether he's even an average NFL player right now. And DJ Reed did not really play up to his contract. I don't think last year. He had some real rough games. He had some nice games too. He's not a bad player. I think he had a step back the year, though, for sure. So they needed some depth. And we haven't seen anything from Ennis Rakestraw, another draft pick from 2 years ago. So, of course, going into this draft, cornerback was a need that a lot of people were talking about, was one that I was definitely something I was looking to get. But let's talk about Keith Abney. This is a guy that really could have went a lot earlier. I know he was projected to go in the 2nd round. He's a Dallas kid. Plays with really good, outstanding footwork. What really sets him apart is his back pedal and stuff like that. He's got elite foot quickness. Not a huge guy, 5'10", 187, 44 tackles last year, 1 sack, 2 interceptions, 12 pass breakups. That's pretty solid. And again, goes back to what I've said about everybody on this list. The motor is nonstop. He's a competitor. He's a guy that's going to get in there. He's going to compete, and that's the guys the Lions want. The guys with a chip on their shoulder. And he's going to have a little chip on their shoulder. That's one thing I like about drafting guys who slide in the draft is that they're going to come in like they should have been a first rounder, and they're going to want to prove themselves. And this could be one of those instances because I think he's got that kind of talent. I think value-wise, I think it's a good midday value pick. I think, again, it's excellent. I think that you could have got him second day. You could have got him third round, and I don't think anybody would have blinked. I think getting him fourth round where they got him is outstanding. I think in terms of where he fits, I think he's going to compete for some spots. I know we signed a lot of defensive backs this offseason, but a lot of them to 1-year deals, so we're not committed to any of them. And this is, of course, a fourth-round pick. We're not committed really to a fourth-round pick, but you certainly want to give him a chance to compete. We can take a look a little bit on what he brings to the table and how he fits into our defense here. Again, when you watch his tape, you see the instinct, you see the ability to get to the ball. You see there getting a piece of that football on, really nice play. They didn't just get a piece of the football. They got a piece of the guy. He's got a really nice run defense grade here as well, as you see the kind of the hands he's got in making the play, and played in an offensive conference as well. And I think that's sometimes a good thing to get when you have a defensive standout in the conference that scores a lot of points, like the Big 12. I think that. He's worth getting a guy who can compete. You see there the nice ball skills, not interfering, getting his hands up and making the play on the football. I think the Lions got a real nice deal here. I think I like the athlete. I like the football player. I think he's going to be a great fit. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he contributed on some snaps, perhaps competed for that nickel spot. But he's definitely going to see some action and special teams, perhaps even as a gunner. It wouldn't be a Brad Holmes draft without somebody who played football at Alabama, and it certainly wouldn't be a Brad Holmes draft without a pick that is a little interesting. Kendrick Law was the pick in the 5th round at 168. Now, I have a policy of just not complaining about picks after the 3rd round because at that point, you're just going with your board and you're picking the best possible football players. So when you look at that philosophy with Brad Holmes, especially what he's doing here, you can see the potential here for Kendrick Law. He's taken receivers late before. They really haven't panned out, but not anyone quite like Kendrick Law. He got a lot of athleticism. He's a big play threat, elite speed. He makes a lot of good. He's really good. He's decent at his contested catchability, and he led Kentucky with yards after the catch. He's got really good elite skills in terms of being a ball carrier. Now, why hasn't it panned out in terms of, he started out at Alabama, got some touches, got some plays here and there, but never really carved out a role there. And then he goes to Kentucky. And, of course, you go to Kentucky, they have some good players, but certainly not as good as Alabama. So, of course, he's a star there, but still didn't produce really super elite numbers. So, really, this is a pick based on his athleticism. But his tape's pretty solid. Let's take a look at it. As you see here, is last year with Kentucky. Looking to get the ball out in the flat, and this is where he shines. He's getting the ball after the catch, getting out to the corner, getting a nice little game against a nice defense. And I will say one of the biggest justifications you can make for this pick as you kind of take a look at, the Kentucky crowd, loving what he can do there, is the fact that they let Khalif Raymond go in the offseason. So Khalif Raymond filled a handful of roles for the Lions, including kick returner, and including gadget play guys. So if they're looking for a guy who can potentially fill those roles, that makes a lot of sense to go get Kendrick Law, as you see his hurdle there. He is a slot receiver who's built like a linebacker, very muscular, very jacked guy. He benches almost 400 pounds from what I understand. Gets in these, again, good gadget guy. I know they're using Jameson Williams a lot in that role as well, but potentially this is a guy who could carve out maybe a couple plays in the playbook, but never really carved out a big role in college. See if he can put it together in the NFL with a lot of really good athleticism. Solid pick for a 5th rounder. Well, we knew going into this draft that the Lions were going to have to address the defensive line at least a little bit, especially a little bit in the interior. We already addressed the edge rusher with Derek Moore. Now they look a little bit at a guy who can maybe play both interior and exterior with Skylar Gill-Howard, from Texas Tech. They picked in round 6 at pick 205. He's a guy who can two-gap. He's an interior disruptor. He's going to collapse that pocket, the thing that I Brad Holmes likes and the Lions like to do. Needed more depth. I mean, Aleem McNeil came back from his ACL injury, big contract. didn't play super well last year. They took Tyleik Williams in the first round last year. He made a couple of nice plays. I like Tyleik Williams a lot moving forward. He's got an interesting story, does Gil Howard. He started at Upper Iowa University, which actually recruited me, yours truly, out of high school. Didn't end up going there. But he was a linebacker, 240 pounds. He worked at FedEx to try to make ends meet. And then, he kept working, kept playing. Ended up going to Northern Illinois. It was all MAC. Ended up finishing at Texas Tech, where he, had some really, really nice plays before he had a bit of an injury. He's a bit undersized, but he's very explosive. Good athlete, good first step quickness. Let's take a look at the film. You can see a little bit from his time here at Texas Tech, getting some really nice penetration, wearing number 0 there, just collapsing the pocket. A lot of time in between these snaps, but this was against Arkansas Pine and Bluff. Again, early on in the season, because he did suffer an injury, didn't be able to finish. Texas Tech had a really good season last year, had a really good defense, and he was going to be a big part of that, even with the with the injury there. Again, disruptive guy. He's always going to be there in the interior. Plays with really good first step quickness. He shoots the gap. He disrupts the interior. He's got good penetration skills. Very high motor. You're going to hear me say that about a lot of these guys. As you see, the biggest play he made, interception, pick six, big guy, touchdown. One of my favorite things against old Kent State. Injury history, of course. Brad Holmes likes to take a couple of these guys. He had an ankle injury in 2005. He's probably going to be looking at a 3 technique situation for the Lions, maybe rotational 4, but he's going to have to be a little more durable, going to prove his durability, but could potentially carve out a role as a rotational player, maybe as soon as this year. To wrap up the NFL draft, the Lions version of Mr. Irrelevant, the final pick, round 7, pick 222, Tyre West, defensive tackle from Tennessee. And once again, they dip into the defensive tackle pool. Versatile big bodies. That's what I'll say about him. He's very versatile. He played defensive end. He played tackle. Same thing with kind of Gil Howard. Once again, a lot of high motor, a lot of upside, pass rush specialist potentially in sub packages if he develops quickly. This is a 7th round flyer. I don't have a lot of film on him. This is a guy that, again, we could use some defensive tackle depth. We could use some defensive line depth in general, especially if that's the one thing the Lions love to get is a guy who can play at the 3 technique, 1 technique, and even potentially outside, wide, maybe even a wide set, outplaying end. And this is a guy that can do that. Tifton, Georgia guy from playing out of high school, big body, 6'3", 278 pounds-ish, and had a nice year at Tennessee. In his career at Tennessee, had 10 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. He did play at the Senior Bowl, did some nice work there. Has some real nice, legitimate power, and he's got an elite motor. Again, I'll keep saying every one of these guys, as you're going to see, is either a team captain or is one of those guys that's just going to keep working, going to keep outworking you, and that is how he's going to be able to get a spot on this team because there isn't a ton of depth where he had drafted. If he can show out, as on the practice squad or in training camp. I could see potentially some role there, but it's a 7th round flyer. We'll see how it plays out. So there you have it, guys. That was the Detroit Lions 2026 NFL draft. I think they filled a lot of good needs. I think they got good value. I think they picked up some nice depth at some key pieces in the day 3. I thought day 3 was pretty strong, and especially since I like day 1 and 2 so much. I mean, we only made 1 pick on day 2, but it was the pick we needed to make, which was another edge rusher to go with Aiden Hutchinson. The Lions are going to need production out of some of these guys this year, that's for sure. I think we're going to need Blake Miller to play at right tackle at some point. If Larry Borum is our right tackle all year, then this pick didn't go well. That's what I'm going to say. Derek Moore, I'd love to see him get 4 or 5 sacks this year. That would be awesome. That would be, I think, a high ceiling for him. If he blows up and gets 10 sacks, that's fantastic. But I think a good goal for him, if he's able to carve out a 3rd down role, would be 4 or 5 sacks, which would be awesome. But looking forward, I think the Lions have a lot of potential in this draft. It's been a couple years since we've had a really good draft, so it's hoping that Brad Holmes can kind of get that magic back he got from that Gibbs, Campbell, Laporta. You remember that whole thing. So go Lions. Let's see how this plays out.